where you can record a single video and relative to Mr. Beast, right? Maybe you're getting 100 views, to 12 million. People get discouraged by this idea of, oh, my video only got watched 100 times. And I always used to say in these curriculums, like, imagine how long it would take you to go and give that talk 100 times, so 100 different people.
Thank you so much, Jack, for taking the time. I really, really appreciate you taking the time. You're a great artist, one of the best. And you created this brand online that's very, very impressive, and it compounded over time. So you have art pieces that you created over time. And when people think about brands, they think about companies. So they think about Apple, Coke, Nike, Disney. But the creation of the internet has enabled the creation of personal brands. Individuals now have brands. And I think you as an artist has one of the most recognizable and important brands on the internet. How does one build a personal brand?
Great question. Thank you very much for the kind words. I think the funny thing for me, the journey of getting there is like not necessarily intentional. I didn't set out with the intention of let me build a brand or let me design something that specific. It really came from a almost countless number of iterations of trying to design something that was more aligned with the things that I wanted to be spending my time doing. So I studied as a graphic designer, graduated school, and went into design internships and worked in the agency world in New York for about 10 years. And almost countless number of iterations of trying to design something that was more aligned with the things that I wanted to be spending my time doing. So I studied as a graphic designer, graduated school, and went into design internships and worked in the agency world in New York for about 10 years. And the things that I loved about those jobs, I think, were this idea of solving problems creatively and trying to distill something to its essence, trying to come up with something really succinct to summarize something complicated. And after 8, 9 years or so of working in those environments for other people, I had this idea, I can do this myself, right? You get into for me, it was sort of getting to a point in those businesses where I understood the broader economics of how it all worked and arrogantly thought, oh, I'm doing the work, so I should be getting the lion's share of the upside from this stuff. But, there was a lot of arrogance involved in that. There's so much administration, so much politics. So like when you're interfacing with these big companies, it's not just the designer that's creating value, right? It's all of the people that surround and maintain the relationships that think that. So long story short, I basically tried to copy that business model. It went okay for a little while, but ultimately there's a fork in the road there where you either follow in the footsteps of the companies that you didn't like working at, where you have to hire a team and, just build this thing out to serve the changing needs of all these companies that you're interfacing with and providing services for, or you just go incredibly narrow and you kind of pick a very, very specific lane. And the thing that makes that possible on the internet is your ability to reach an incredible number of people in a very specific way, as opposed to being an agency business in New York, for example, where whoever comes and asks you to pitch business, you're going to take the opportunity, right? And what that ends up doing is like stretching your focus in all these different directions. You can build a reputation as, a great creative shop that comes up with good solutions to problems, but you're not necessarily being pursued for your very, very specific methodology or aesthetic. And Visualize Value is really like a response to a bunch of different failed experiments of trying to be everything to everyone, like I started posting examples of work on the internet probably since I graduated school, like way like over a decade ago. I've been posting my work to the internet, but it wasn't until I picked this really specific constraint and went all in on it that I saw any kind of compounding return or, second order effects of that have been even hard to measure now. But the idea of shutting off all of the kind of what if, you know, I should chase that or chase this and respond to this thing that's kind of outside of my wheelhouse, but could be, I might get paid in the short term. And yeah, making these very simple aesthetic decisions and sticking with this format for a couple of years to kind of flip that equation on its head, where originally you're responding to demand that people have, to having this thing out in the world that creates its own demand. And that's like where it got to. And that really presented all the subsequent opportunities, like the art world, those things having value in themselves versus being these like lead magnets for a service business or a product business. So in my mind, it's a very logical evolution from where it was to now being, the pieces themselves carry some sort of value.
So you mentioned that you basically focus and you you removed, you know, all all these different type of work that you're putting out there. Does that also apply to companies when they create brands? Do they need to focus, and how does that apply in the long run? Like, let's say Nike or Apple, do they need to focus, and how does that apply to like personal brands and people on the internet?
So I think it's a scale question for sure. And I could not answer the question at a scale of a Apple or Nike. This idea of if your desire or like everything that I've been working on and doing and the decisions that I've made, I think the ones that have been the ones I look back on and think of as the right decisions are all based on like this constraint that I wanted to be independent, like the idea that I could create something with enough leverage that I could work on it with myself or a few people that I choose to work with on occasion. That's really the constraint. I think in an alternate universe, you could grow Visualize Value into something much bigger than it is, quote unquote bigger in terms of like expanding out into other markets and products. Education component of it is probably the best example where we have 4 curriculums and you find product market fit with a curriculum and a very specific style of teaching. You could easily, but easily is maybe an exaggeration, but you could see a path to taking new material and integrating that into the set of products and going into, all these different education verticals. But that is kind of in contrast with me wanting to remain nimble and independent, right? That would require you to hire very specific sorts of people and make connections in new places. And I do think majority of companies that get to that inflection point or that level of activation energy where they can start to branch out do have that in common, like my Apple history is not perfect, but Macintosh as this like massive inflection point of home computing, and then the iPhone, the level of focus required to do something like that is out of this world. I don't actually know what that was for Nike, but I imagine it's something similar, right? They nailed one silhouette, one shoe, one thing that got enough attention on it that it can kind of break out of its silo. So 100% the idea of focus to get you to that level where you can even entertain doing something else, I think is consistent across all of the successful examples anyway.
Interesting. And for you, what was the inflection point where you figure out, oh look, now now I have a personal brand on the internet. Now I can set myself free. Yeah.
So I think there's a couple I can refer back to. I think even in hindsight, I didn't think that at the time, but now looking back, there were inflection points. Like, um, the first was probably, I'm sure you know, Nassim Taleb's
Yep.
Anti-Fragile, All by Randomness. So I was reading all of his work and I was making a couple pieces that were like expansions or like visual references to things that he's written and coined. And he retweeted one of them one day, and that was like really, really uh, close to when I began this endeavor. And just seeing the response to that on Twitter, like a light bulb went off there, where it's like, okay, this is a formula of sorts. You know, if I can make something that resonates with a person who has much bigger reach than I do, in a way that invites them to like amplify it to their audience, then I have a good shot of expanding the number of people I can reach with this type of work. That was the first one. And then one other good one. Do you know David Perel?
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, he's he's a great writer and he's built these different tools for people to like build up their writing skills. And he tweeted, this is probably early 2020, maybe, how he would like to learn how to use visuals to expand upon the ideas that he's writing about. And that was, I just quote tweeted that at the time and said, would anyone be interested in me putting together a curriculum on this? And the response to that was huge. And that validated the product before I built it. And that I think did help me cross this threshold of like, okay, this is probably a bigger opportunity than me going and talking to individual clients or, you know, going in the opposite direction, which is just more hyper customized one-off engagements. So those two are uh, some of the biggest ones from early on for sure.
So more like a product instead of a service. Is that right?
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So let's talk about the compounding forces in the internet. Um, so compound is like a really powerful force in nature, and I think humans they don't understand how strong a force it is because in nature we're not genetically built, to deal with it. But like in this world that we live right now, we have 8 billion people. Um, the way the capitalist society works, from building companies to even building your finance, compounding has a really strong effect. But also for brands and personal brands, have you noticed that with your brand, and how should people think about it online?
hmm Yeah, for sure. I've noticed that. I think I have to give credit to Naval Ravikant, whose work I was reading in, again, 2019, 2020. And I think a lot of these lessons are so inherent to anybody that spent time building software or an internet native product of any kind, which I did not come from that, did not come from that world, despite the fact I was designing digital products. I wasn't, I wasn't involved at the point of deployment. You know, it was just design where you'd hand off these things and then the teams that would implement them would go and learn all the lessons and I would just be there like making it look nice. And that whole idea of network effects, you know, the long tail of even media leverage, right? Where you can record a single video and relative to Mr. Beast, right? Maybe you're getting 100 views, you know, to 12 million. People get discouraged by this idea of, oh, my video only got watched 100 times. And I always used to say in these curriculums, like, imagine how long it would take you to go and give that talk 100 times to 100 different people. Like, it's literally takes you 100 times longer, right? And that that comparison factor where people get discouraged because they're not Mr. Beast is where, a lot of these endeavors fall short, despite the fact that, just like, if you think about it completely pragmatically, it's just an opportunity, or an incredible set of technologies where you don't have to repeat yourself. And that stuff shows up much later, or you realize the benefits of it much later, because you'll meet people even, or you'll talk to people, and be like, oh, I watched that video you did 3 years ago and it made me look into this, or it made me start this, or it made me do this experiment. And the second order effects of that are just unbelievable. And just by showing up and putting stuff out there and making this like network of things that talk to each other, and like invite new participants into these networks, you can't really keep track of the the butterfly effect that occurs as a byproduct of that. And even following things like, the view numbers on a given day, or the follower count on a given day, whatever that might be, um, doesn't do justice to it. And it's not, this has been articulated so many ways and so eloquently before, but it's like, the position you're in today is more reflective of what you did a year ago than what you did yesterday. And that's like you have to have done the year's work to understand that. And like, in the same way compounding works in finance, you don't appreciate it until you've had basically the fortitude to stick with it while it feels pointless, or you're not reaping the benefits of that thing. And you have to basically trust the theory before you see it in practice. And in finance, it's even more, I guess it's even harder to convince the average participant in finance, because to really understand compounding, the more capital you have, the more of a profound effect it has, right? And that's just a very rare situation. Versus YouTube views, if you have a laptop with a camera in it, you can start to take advantage of this phenomenon um, without having to own massive amounts of a commodity. Let's say you can kind of put your thumb on the scale of this thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. One thing that I've learned over time is the sticking with it, and that's true for finance, true for building your online audience, to building a company, building software. In your case, is you're, I think you're an artist, and you're building art on the internet. Um, and sometimes you find the idea market fit, or idea as a product. um and that reminds me of like Jordan Peterson, when he mentioned that he published he published a few books before, but he didn't get as much attention, or as much people buying um the book 12 Rules for His Life. And the way he realized the idea of 12 rules for his life was a good book. He was talking apparently with his publisher, and one of the core answers that he gave was like the 12 rules of the life, and for someone's life. And that core answer got millions of upvotes or something like that. And he published a book, and that's how he got his break. But it's interesting to see that in order for you to find that value that people are searching for, that product, that idea, it takes time.
Mhm.
It takes a lot of work, and it takes years. And in finance, you need to stick with it. With art, you need to stick with it, and it's just a compounding factor. And once you reach that point, it's just like inflection point,
Mhm.
and it's beautiful to see. um but anyway, once you talk about your experience finding that inflection point, like where exactly, how why do you think that, for example, checks or Visualize Value or even Opepen edition. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Resonated with the public. Why do you think there was a product market fit in this
I think,
product?
what's
Let's
funny
say.
about the I think I could give an answer for each one. Like the visualized value stuff was really the introspective journey from, trying to figure out what you want to do professionally, trying to sort of align your interests with your vocation, your income, things of that nature. Like that pursuit, I think is so universal. Like who doesn't want to identify and find ideas that bring like those two things closer together? So just being transparent about this is all what's the word? Speculation on why I think it resonates. This is kind of what I've deduced from conversations I've had, but this idea of being transparent about the ideas that are actually useful or true. And that was the filter for Visualize Value, where I think having done like 10 years in the agency business and then tried 3 or 4 companies and failed miserably, you have this set of criteria or the set of experience that you can filter these ideas through. It's like, which one of these actually is true in all the situations that I found myself in? And if it didn't meet that threshold, then I wouldn't post it. And that, just based on the people I've met through Visualize Value, I think is the headspace or the things that are consuming people or interesting to people. So it became this magnet for, people with those ambitions or with the desires to learn about or build upon those ideas to come together. And then checks is like, in my mind, one layer of abstraction out from that, where you have this story that's occurring across this entire network, Twitter at the time, right? The acquisition of Twitter from its old ownership. I'd also started to go through this transition over the previous 2 or 3 years with crypto and more specifically NFTs, where these things that I was creating before I knew what an NFT was were really where the value existed in the work I was doing. But I had to basically use them as a distraction to get somebody to do something else. Like the image, a piece of art was hey, look at this. This is an interesting idea. Come and buy this education product, or let's work together on a consulting thing. And nothing wrong with that. And I still would be happy running that business today, but realizing that the work itself is where the value kind of emanates from, right? Is where and there is a desire for people to collect those objects, as ephemeral as they are. That also combined with Twitter as this open network where I'd had these experiences like building an audience and reaching people permissionlessly, the Navals and Nassim Talebs of the world, like being able to have ideas amplified by them. Checks is like all of that plus the conversation that's happening on Twitter, which is this idea of top down versus bottom up consensus, right? All these themes that are inherently baked into Bitcoin white paper, even this idea that the network can secure consensus versus 5 people in a conference room in San Francisco. I think this thing just sort of encapsulated that in a way that I couldn't even articulate verbally or couldn't type out. It just like was brewing in my head for so long. And then this image represented all of those questions. And then I think that resonates with people for a different reason, but same theme is like, I can build a body of work that is proof of how I think and what I'm capable of. And these are all the previous themes from Visualize Value, but even more succinctly represented in this check mark, which used to mean I am notable in the eyes of the establishment, right? And then Opepen is kind of a combination of those themes plus like the absurdity even of the PFP market in NFTs. Like a comment on the like arbitrary rarity that exists within those collections, the like PvP one aesthetic versus another, um, and also a lot of the things I learned in my design career where if you can make something recognizable, then again, like you can experience this compounding effect. Like the visualize value constraint was a specific aesthetic, and checks and Opepen have constraints, but they're more like at the canvas level or the framework level. So you have any grid of 8 by 10 symbols, doesn't have to be check marks. They're like referencing that template. And then for Opepen, the silhouette itself has this recognizability that a 2-year-old could draw it, or you could have like, you know, Beeple render a version of it, or you like have any AI model run 1,000 different variations of it. That was another thing that really influenced it originally, was this idea of, hey, if anybody in the world can make a any style of image in any degree of complexity in any style, then what is actually valuable and what part of the process is the value coming from? And the question, I guess, is being asked there is, um, if you can marry all of that quote unquote value creation to a very specific symbol, and you can unite all of these different aesthetics, and you can build a platform for artists to like exhibit their work. That's another thing that I kind of learned through Visualize Value was people can be incredibly talented, but if they don't have a stage to exhibit on, you can be shouting into the void for years and years and years. So that's another thing that we're aiming to accomplish with Opepen, is create this solution to the cold start problem for artists, where here's my interpretation of the silhouette. Oh, that's amazing. Let me show you the rest of my work and like give you the background on how I got here. So it's trying to create an environment that's bigger than, here's this like 10,000 variations of this character that we came up with.
It's kind of interesting that your art is, some of it's a commentary of, the culture right now, and that actually kind of resonates a lot with people. And when you think about artists at the other time, when they're creating their art, they had their constraints on the type of technology that they were using. In some ways, they were, doing a commentary, or they were criticizing, or so. Like when you think even with Leonardo da Vinci, with the creation of Adam, or the Last Supper, there is some ana- analysis that show, oh, look, the creation of Adam, there's like all this meaning behind it, and it's very interesting. But in today's society, we have the internet, and I think you mentioned this quote by Virgil: "The world moves as fast as Instagram," and and at the same time, you have, on the opposite side, you have the Lindy effect. So you have, Mona Lisa, or and the creation of Adam, where the artwork is recognizable for such a long time, and has stay um, relevant for such a long time. How do you think about this dichotomy when building new pieces of art? When you think about, the world's
Mhm.
moving as fast as Instagram, and you're creating art as fast as Instagram, but at the same time, you want to think, oh, look, this might be something that people talk about in the future. Look, this was a moment in time where where there was this fight of power, the centralization versus centralization of power. How do you think about that?
A great question and a great reference, the Virgil quote, because I think this, like what he accomplished with Off-White, and more specifically the quotation marks that were like central to the Off-White thesis and aesthetic, and like poking fun at the high art world, and even kind of landing him in a like the most preeminent position in high fashion eventually. The idea, I think, is because the speed of the internet is so vicious, the thing that you like, the idea has to transcend the visual somehow. Like the quotation marks have become so synonymous with that. It's like you've co-opted this symbol that is already recognized as a uh, like a way that humans communicate, and then you're embedding all of this additional meaning on top of it. And I think that's true of the check mark, very specific, like the contention that exists around that, and even the themes beyond centralization and decentralization, even the like, is this image real? Is this video real? And does like a little check mark next to it actually mean anything in that context? No, right? Like on Twitter specifically, it's like, here's proof that this person paid $8 a month. It's not proof that the content they're uploading is real, right?
Yeah,
But the at a deeper level, the like the provenance of a Ethereum address, for example, in my mind, does get closer to that idea where if you have a cumulative reputation based on cryptographic signatures from a specific address, from like a single private key, then you have more to lose than starting an $8 account on Twitter. And even using the Twitter example, there's obviously reputational equity in a Twitter account, and there is stuff to lose there. But this symbol to me just represents all of these like clashing themes that are happening right now, and an inflection point in how we organize society, how we talk to each other, how we think about what's real and what isn't, and just thinking of like decades ahead, and about what can be used as a point of reference to describe that transition from like before and after. To me, it has a good shot of being one of those works that describes that moment in time. And honestly, you only know in hindsight that that's true too. It's like at the moment you do it, it's not really like, oh, this is going to be this perfect commentary on everything that's happening right now, and in 20 years it's like the story actually has to go a certain way for it to remain relevant or interesting. And you obviously, if the internet is your canvas, then the first image is not necessarily the artwork either, right? The whole everything that's happening on that network is part of the artwork. There's a incredible artist called 113 that works on a project called Math Castles. I don't know if you've seen this.
I haven't.
Um, but the this idea of network as art, and he actually described Bitcoin as a work of art. So like this idea of a thing created by people that reflects uh, their commentary or their criticism of the system at large, you can position Bitcoin in that light very easily, right? It's like, this is what's happening in the world, the tools that people use to create things and comment on the world. Um, yeah, just a fascinating evolution. And I imagine people practicing art at different periods of history, moving to mediums that were on the edge or like beyond what was typically considered art. Not in every case, but in many cases are evolving what the definition of art is. That idea, um, again, sort of plays with this period of time we're in, where there's not even consensus around, like, we can't form consensus around the most basic of topics, right? So what is art is completely up for grabs.
It's kind of interesting that you mentioned the check mark, and um, in my opinion, we are in a transition time, and when we think about the printing press, it had a lot of transition of power, and and the church at the time was the most powerful institution, and the printing press completely changed that. And in the same way, the internet, social media is changing power from the hand of a few media institutions to the people. And when you mention, like, how do I believe that the check mark um, is posting, a video that's actually, real? And in the back of my head, I'm like, I mean, the same is true beforehand.
Right.
Before you paid $8, like, whatever they were, like, these media companies,
It's
like,
true.
were posting. How do I know that that was true as well? Like,
Yeah.
it's just the check mark changed hands, but still you have this rep, uh, reputation game that's played, but it's a much different game, where before you had, these institutions that were, like, very, very big. So if you think about New York Times would dictate a lot of the culture, it's a lot of it was up, like, New York Times was upstream of a lot of other media
Mhm. Mhm.
properties. And right now, the upstream is Twitter, or upstream is this frog like, or like cats posting on Twitter, like
Right,
memes,
right, right.
and that's
Yeah.
upstream. But, like, it's just the check mark that moved hands
Yeah.
from these big institutions to, like, individuals along the internet. And I think that, I mean, I think we're just starting to see this transition of power, even though social media has been here for some time. I think we're just starting to see the influence of that in society. It's like when society built um, like a nervous system. Like, we now can communicate very fast between individuals, and so ideas flow very fast, compared to before, where you had someone at the center that was dictating all the messages. But at the same time, now we have like crypto, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Bitcoin as money, and then you have, like, this decentralized computing platform that where it's also decentralized. You have decentralized money, and that also will have a huge impact in society. And I think we're just starting to see. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. Um, there is this communication guy that used to say the medium is the message. And funnily enough, I
I think I have that book behind me somewhere. Marshall McLuhan.
Marshall, yeah, exactly. And funnily enough, I mean, a decade ago, I worked at Facebook, and Chris Cox, which was, the chief product officer, Facebook, he's back there. That was the first, like, the initiation when you started at Facebook. He used to say the medium is the message,
Wow.
and Facebook is a new medium, as Instagram, as, social media is a new medium. And with new mediums there are new opportunities, right? And with the internet and social media, they are new mediums, they are new ways of communication. And it seems that Bitcoin, Ethereum are new mediums as well. What kind of opportunities and what kind of messages, can you uh portray there, and how does that change society, do you think?
Gosh, huge question. I hope I can do it justice. I think the part of the design of the checks project is trying to comment on beyond just this changing hands of authority, the actual distinction created by real ownership in something, like ownership as this thing that you can demonstrate with this medium. So the Checks project specifically gives agency to everybody who owns that collection to kind of shape its future. So it will always be this reflection of the behavior of the people who own it and interact with it. And as a medium, I guess that's what a market is, right? It's like you're looking at a chart of psychology. And I think Ethereum specifically, this idea of being able to create these networks that are that have these these visual interfaces, or the ability to like bring people together through a set of very specific uh, ideas. In the case of Visualize Value, that has been like Ethereum basically unlocked that in like down the road. The network was built, but it was trapped in these centralized products like Instagram and Twitter. And the way that value was created from those networks was done via like, oh, let's get a Shopify page set up. Let's build a product. Let's like do a Stripe invoice for somebody for consulting, versus now via Ethereum, this thing has like its own little economy. It's like living in, this distributed network, and it has like value. It has people participating in it every day. It has like imports and exports going on. And just at a fundamental level, it changes your relationship with it completely. So this idea of like being able to, just having the agency to be able to create at that level, and the composability of these things, I think that's another like fundamental unlock that is really hard to get your head around until you've been exposed to it for a really long time, where the black box product development of quote unquote Web 2 products, where the speed of development is so much slower because you can't have people from outside fork, develop, reinterpret, compose this stuff. It really, your relationship with it has to change for that reason too. Is like you have to be less you just have to think about it differently, I think, in order to let the network grow at its optimal rate. The composability of this stuff, where anybody could build a new front end for these projects, and that to me is a totally different mental model of how you can create value. And if there's a network that resonates with you, it solves the problems that I was trying to, or it begins to solve the problems that I was trying to poke at in the early days of Visualize Value, where make something that you can eventually turn into something that is that sells something, or like finds people that want to work with you. These things are like, no, they act as this catalyst for incredible like creative development and iteration, just by a function of already existing. It's like incredibly early days, and there's only a few examples, I think, of networks that do this well. But as a change in behavior more broadly, I think it's like a massive shift in how people will behave.
Yeah. I really think that the composability part of it that you mentioned is very, very important, and is a very powerful force that's similar to compounding. And when you have the network already built into it, you can compose on top of that network, and you don't have to build the same way that you mentioned. Look, in Visualize Value, when you started, you had to build that network from scratch. And that's very, very, very different. And we're just starting to scratch the surface of that. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very, very interesting. Um, with checks and like, for example, visualize value, I think you have like really, really great taste on, determining, look, this is like really good, and you put your work out there. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about that, how one, develop taste, and how one builds one. Are there artists that you admire, and why would do you admire them? Do
Mm-hmm.
you like their taste and things like that? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a great quote by a guy called Ira Glass about taste, that the summary of it is basically your taste has to always outrun you. If you have good taste, then you're basically always going to be disappointed with what you make, because your taste is going to outpace your ability to execute on it forever. So the funny thing about that is, like, there's always like a hint of, and there's very few pieces of work you look back on like that was perfect. Like, it was definitely, I was happy enough with it to put it out into the world, but there could be, yeah, it's kind of not answering the question, but this idea of it always being this evolving thing that you're chasing, that's the first thing. And then just from my personal relationship with taste, I think is definitely, as a designer, I was way more interested in rules and systems, and like a lot of European design really resonated with me, like Swiss graphic design. That there's a great book called Grid Systems that I really started to like have an appreciation for these invisible decisions that people make in design that give structure to something. So like the relationship between the size of two elements on a page, the invisible grid that elements sit on, and you can look at something that is seemingly incredibly simple, but the level of thought that goes into putting everything where it is just the amount of time and the amount of discrepancy there could be between one designer and another placing the same three elements on a blank piece of paper is like, that I think is an example of that like infinite game where you there's always room for improving this stuff. Uh, and then just to give some specific examples, there's a guy called Joseph Muller Brockman, who's a designer and had a really specific graphic style that I always admired. Dieter Rams was a product designer for Braun, and huge inspiration for Johnny Ive and all the Apple products eventually. Just
Hmm.
these incredibly simple, like reductive, but like well ahead of their time aesthetically. And this relationship between form and function as a way to measure taste too. There's definitely work that I admire based on how it looks, but I've always been way more drawn to like how you communicate an idea, or how you get somebody to use something in a way that is uh, superior than they previously used it. Like a lot of the work we're doing in Checks and Opepen, the interfaces that have to exist around the art itself are as much a part of experiencing it as looking at the image. And if you're building on these networks that have basically infinite degrees of interactivity, whatever you can do on a screen can be part of this work. The thing that's interesting to me is pushing everything that exists outside of the image. So, yeah, I'm way more inspired by the like systems design, and then being able to make something incredibly complicated seem simple. Uh, and I think there's a Da Vinci quote about that too. It's like simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. That's always the goal. And that's a great, like, Visualize Value accidentally just became this great canvas for honing that skill, where
Yeah.
you're trying to communicate something and just keep taking stuff away until it breaks. Like, does it work? Do you need that piece? No, take it out. Oh, it kind of falls apart, put it back in. So, like, just having that set of constraints, um, not make you spin your wheels on superfluous decisions too, where it's like, here's the typeface. You can only use white outline strokes and the canvas is black. You're not sitting in front of a blank page and be like, oh, should it be this color? Should I choose this typeface? What photograph should I use? But you remove all of that in the same way that if you're like writing something, um, you can distill it. And Twitter actually helped me, I think, become a better designer too, just by way of having a character limit. So where I would used to like go and present something and write an essay with it, it's like Twitter forced me to contain a thought in every tweet. So it really, like, again, the medium is the message, right? This idea of a 280 character medium forces you to get way more direct and succinct with what you're trying to communicate. And I definitely credit that to improving the my design ability, my writing ability, my marketing ability. All of those things are downstream of, hey, you need to get this thing communicated in this amount of space.
Interesting. Yeah, you were mentioning some European, um, the Swiss design system, and in the back of my head, I was thinking about how I really, really enjoy some European brands. I mean, you're from Britain, but um, it, I really want to see the European market to come back, because I think if you think about even car brands, the German car market suffering right now, actually, in the world. And if you think about, Italian brands like Fiat will merge with Chrysler, and now you have
Hmm.
only Ferrari, that's the Italian brand. But like, whenever I visit Europe a year or two ago to France, and I was like, man, the clothes here are really, like, they're really well designed. I really, really
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
here the way they design it. And if you think about fashion brands, a lot of them come from Europe. And I think there is there is some kind of taste that comes from these regions. Maybe it's because of the constraint that they have, the society that Europeans live, that brings that about them. But I really want the European market to thrive. Um, uh,
There's
Putting that
also
aside,
Some Lindy characteristics there too, right? Like some of those brands are the oldest brands in the world, the European fashion houses.
exactly, yeah, yeah, and like that also sometimes, like, I have this in my head, um that conflict, because with the internet and with software, and like crypto, for example, is something very, very new. And then you have something that's like very lindy, that is going to last a long time. So there's always a conflict of adopting what's the newest versus using something that works, and for a long time, will continue to exist, right? And how institutions, I was talking to uh this VC, who also is like a great writer. He wrote Paper Belt on Fire, and how these institutions, when you think about them, they are transforming. So I was talking about Harvard specifically, because if you think about um, working specifically for software companies, for example, you don't necessarily need a degree anymore, and
Right.
and and a lot of the knowledge is online. And but there is that club title that you get going going to Harvard or going to these universities. So these institutions still have value, but and they were created a long time ago. But now with the internet, you don't necessarily need to rely on those institutions. So like there's some kind of tension. Let's go to the last topic. We're almost out of time. I wanted to talk about Anthology of Balaji. It's done illustration work for that book. Amazing work there. Would love to hear some of the most interesting lessons that you've learned working on it, and like what do you like the most of this book, like working on this project?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was an honor to do it. I don't try and see if I have a copy. I think they're all downstairs. But so Eric Jorgensen, who invited me to participate in that, he actually did the Almanac of Naval first. And this is a
Yeah.
good wrap up topic of basically the permissionless ethos of Visualize Value, right? I read Naval's tweets originally, made visual responses to all of them. And then when I saw Eric was writing the book, I sent him a DM. I was like, hey, man, I have made these 20 images, 30 images. If you want to include them, please do. Like, it's up to you. He sent me the transcript, worked on it, included basically all of them. And, 2 years ago, I didn't know any of this stuff. I had no idea, I had no concept of a lot of the ideas in that book. And then basically working through that was proof that those ideas work. So it's kind of a poetic thing to wrap it up. And then Balaji's book, I feel like the ideas in there are so direct and practical. There's like a real contrast between those two books where his commentary on media more specifically and like the institutional flippening, imbalancing, so much of like so much of the themes of those ideas feel like the next chapter of even the things that I'm interested in and the world that I've been exploring, and the practicality of them in contrast with quote unquote art world. To me, it's very kind of encouraging or interesting that I can do both of those things. Like you can do illustrations in what many people would think of as a hardcore business or entrepreneurial book. But those ideas are like capturing the ambitions of billions of people, or the changing way in which billions of people are thinking about the direction of the world. But yeah, obviously an incredible thinker, so articulate, and the a lot of his stuff. The quote, Balaji was right. I made a hoodie with that on it a couple years ago. Um, I think, yeah, in a couple of years, maybe we'll have this conversation again. And so much of that stuff will be so prescient. The network state idea, which again is like what Visualize Value is trying to become after being the, independent media business or software business. The next evolution of it is, hey, it's this economy that lives in the cloud that anybody can join and contribute to and benefit from. So, yeah, just being surrounded by those ideas and working through that stuff, it goes into your head in a way that you can't even articulate, because you have to internalize it so much in order to create something that represents it. So, yeah, just massive, another massive contributor to the personal journey and interests, and yeah, hero of mine on the articulate side too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jack, for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Where can people find it? On Farcaster, for example, or anywhere else online?
Yeah, Farcaster, I managed to lock down at Jack, so you can find me on any of your Farcaster clients at Jack, and then Twitter is at Jack Butcher, and anything that we've talked about, you can find them all on there, and or shoot me a message. Thank you for having me on, man.
Thank you.